Hi, I'm Cindy Casper, and I've been teaching at One Day Academy for quite a while in the science department, but I also am teaching in the history department. I went to school at UT and got a degree in microbiology, but all of my extracurricular classes were all in history because I loved it so much and I was quite passionate about it. And so they allowed me to teach these classes here at ODA. This year we're teaching world history. I have a middle school world history course and a high school world history course. And we go all through it. The hardest part for me is to cram all of world history into just 1 year. Yikes. But we try to do that. So I'm going to take you through a little PowerPoint here and show you how the classes work and see what you think about that. All right, great.
Okay, so I teach these classes on Wednesday at the Cornerstone campus at BCOC on Highway 71. It's in the afternoon. Middle school is a 1 o'clock to 2:15 class, and high school 2:30 to 4. We usually get a little early, about maybe 1/4 to 4, that kind of thing. All right. So in middle school, we have these items that are needed. Okay, so the textbook, we are using The Story of the World by Susan Wise Bauer. There are 4 volumes, and you need all 4 of them. They're paperback. They're not very expensive. They're available at Amazon.com, places like that. They're classics in the homeschool world. And so you need basically volumes 1 and 2 for the first semester and 3 and 4 for the second semester. But there's also a curriculum that you purchase. On the left here, you can see The Great Adventure, written by one of our excellent ODA teachers, Doreen Moore. And you can get that through the One Day Academy store. And you purchase that. That is going to have the weekly assignments in there. So the students will have an assignment for reading out of the textbook, and then they will have some questions in the activity guide. And every week they will turn into me a chunk of the papers from the activity guide in a notebook, and then the next week we'll exchange notebooks, similar to what the English classes do. There is also in middle school supplemental reading. All right, so these are in addition to the textbook. There are these classic books that the students will read. Oftentimes I find the students love these extra reading here. It's almost like a little miniature literature class in here, but really what we're doing is emphasizing the history part rather than the literature part. So for instance, we start off in the beginning semester with the bronze bow, and then the questions for that week, instead of coming from the textbook, will come from the reading of the bronze bow. It's a great exciting story about the time of Christ and how some of the Jewish people were acting at that time. It's such a great book. Then we have The Blood Red Horse. This is about the Crusade era of time in history, and it's about a boy who's going off to the Crusades and about his relationship with his horse. Many students find this to be their favorite. In the second semester, we have The Shakespeare Stealer, talking about the times of Elizabethan England, and sort of some intrigue and mystery going on there. And then when the end of year with Snow Treasure, it is a World War II story about children who are helping out actually with the war effort in, I believe, Sweden, I think. But a lot of fun. And once again, the questions would come out of these books instead of the textbook. So it's not like there's double reading necessarily. All right, we do have mandatory projects for this class. Instead of a midterm and final, we have a midterm project and a final project. We have a student here who is showing us how she made a challah bread, because we learned about that with the learning about the Jewish times. And so she braided it and brought it to us, and of course we got to eat it, so that was delicious. And we have a student here who has made a model of the Great Pyramid. And so I always encourage models. Some students do a report type of a thing, but I really encourage some 3-dimensional model like this. They're very impressive. I even had one time a student do a musical. He brought his guitar and he played a musical song for us, and that was pretty cool. This right here was one of my favorites of all time. This is a student's rendition of what the Colossus of Rhodes may have looked like. So he used a lot of clay on that, but then he gave a report as well. So once again, the students would be presenting the project to the class and a small report, so getting a little bit on their public speaking in here. All right, for high school, we have quite a rigorous curriculum that we use for this. I would consider it a advanced placement type of a thing. It looks like this, also written by Mrs. Moore, The City of Man, the City of God. And each week what I'll do is I'll have a lecture time, and they will come listen, basically sit and listen to a lecture. They go home and do their weekly assignment, and then they will turn in that chunk in a notebook, and then we will exchange notebooks the next week. There is for this class a midterm exam because it's the higher level, the high school rigor that goes on here. And then they'll have a final project. Instead of a final exam, they'll have a project, and what they'll do is they will put together a PowerPoint presentation, and that PowerPoint will be a biography of somebody that they found very interesting throughout the years, somebody from world history, and then they'll present it to class. So they'll stand in front of the class and explain what it is about this person. Some students have chosen to do, like, for instance, a battle or something like that. And if they get that okayed through me, that's just fine. The assignment is for a biography, but I have flexibility on that. Okay, so I just want to take you just a little bit through some history things right here to let you know kind of like what I'll be doing is having this little lecture that goes on. So how do we know about history? Well, we know about it through written documents and various other written and unwritten but artifacts that we find that can lend toward understanding stories. Of course, this is a picture of the Bible, which is the ultimate history book. It gives us some of our earliest history, of course, and then we also know that we can trust it, that it has not been written from anybody's point of view except God's, which is very nice, right? So we can use that as our basis. One thing I do like about teaching classes at One Day Academy is that I am free, indeed, to talk about the influence of God on his people. And that is what this curriculum, City of God, City of Man, talking about how there's this conflict between God's plan and man's plan, and we kind of keep comparing those all throughout the year. So really quickly, we start in the beginning here at Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers. Now we start with creation, of course. I go through that whole story, but then we look here at what's happening at the Fertile Crescent area. The area was known as Sumer, so the Sumerians, we start with them, and the Mesopotamians. We move on, of course, this is biblical history. Here we have the sacrifice of Isaac. I wanted to bring that up as well. I bring a lot of art into this. So we definitely discuss art history at the same time that we're discussing history. Oftentimes the art is what I use to illustrate what indeed we're talking about. This is a famous painting that you can find in Florence, and you can see what's going on here. The angel is stopping Abraham as he is about to sacrifice Isaac. We move on through ancient China, and then Egypt, of course. Egypt has, as you can guess, a very, very long history. So there are several weeks that we cover Egypt. We can see the epic and the dynasties that are in here. It's a little bit difficult because it's such old stuff that we don't really know for sure what the years are. But there are some interesting ideas about how the Bible fits into there. You know, who was the Pharaoh at the time of Moses and those kind of things. And there are different ideas from different scholars about that. So I go through all that. It's fun and interesting to cover. We go through, of course, the mummies and the pyramids. You can see right here the development upper and lower Egypt there, and then upper Egypt down below, and the building of the pyramids. This is one of the step pyramids. And then we'll move into, of course, the Great Pyramids. We move in now to the time of Rome, the Roman Republic, which will be moving here to the Roman Empire. So we have the death of Julius Caesar in 44 BC. Here he is, Et Brute. So there are certain years that are important, right? So I don't necessarily teach history that they have to remember what happened on what year of this kind of thing, but there are certain years that are important to keep in mind, 44 BC being one of those years, the death of Julius Caesar. And then, like I said before, I love the fact that I get to emphasize and spend a lot of time on the turning point of all history, and that, of course, is the birth of Jesus Christ. And so we get to cover that in great detail. And I love it that I'm able to teach the truth of this. I don't have to talk about it as a fable or anything like that because we know it's true. And we, of course, know, and we have so much great art about this. We welcome the Prince of Peace, and that has changed everything from Old Testament time to New Covenant time. We do bring in other religions as well, and not to mention architecture. This is the Dome of the Rock that is found in Jerusalem. This was built by the Muslims, so the rise of Islam and how that changes history. And we can see here that as they were moving into Spain, so they started in the Middle East and they're moving over into Spain, and we have a guy coming in right here who's going to try to invade Europe. And so that becomes an important part of history as far as how far advanced will the Islamic religion get. It spent a lot of time in Spain right there. But it brings us to the Battle of Tours of 732, one of those days here. This one's also known as the Battle of Poitiers. And this is Charles Martel, and Charles the Hammer he's called, and he stops the Muslim advance in Europe, which changed forever the shape of Europe. Europe would remain a Christian continent rather than Muslim. So you can see the big change that took place there. Viking life students love to learn about the Vikings. Okay, so we bring them in sort of as we start looking at Middle Ages and on all the stuff that they contributed. 1066, a big year. This would be the Norman invasion, where William the Conqueror invaded from France. He was Norman because he was a Viking, he was a Norseman, and he invaded in and took over England in 1066. Right here also, oftentimes when we're looking at history in general, we leave out some major places. So for instance, Africa, there were some fascinating stories about, like the Empire of Mali, for instance, and other groups that rose and then fell in Africa. And so those are included. Not to mention Japan, the history of Japan, we talk about that. We go to South America, that gets ignored a lot, and look at the history of the peoples of South America, the Inca, the Aztecs. All of those are brought into this. That's what I love about this, a very comprehensive world history that we have here. The Renaissance started over in Italy, in Florence, and so we go through that. It was driven a lot by art and by commerce. That started there. Then the Age of Discovery and Christopher Columbus, 1492, a very big year, right? Each year, what I do for students, when we get to the year 1492, I always bring them a little piece of chocolate, and that's because before 1492, the world did not know about chocolate. So that's why it's a big discovery year, right? Then we have Martin Luther. He is nailing his 95 Theses on the store here at Württemberg, and that's going to make a big change, leading to change over in England. This is Henry VIII. At the beginning, he was a defender of the faith, named that by the Pope because he resisted what Martin Luther did, but then eventually he came around, right, and became a reformer himself. Maybe not for the same reasons that Martin Luther did. This is Tudor England. By this time, we will have studied all of those medieval battles, including the battles of the Wars of the Roses, the 100 Years' War. All of those have been covered by this time. And then we get to Elizabeth I. Here she is. That's her famous quote that she gave when she found out she had become queen. There's a lot of intrigue that's involved in her becoming queen, but it made a huge difference for not just England, but Europe and the Americas. In 1588, we can see a very important event that took place. It is the defeat of the Spanish Armada by little tiny England, which really vaulted England up into great world prominence. William Shakespeare was writing at this time. We cover some of his plays. We talk about him. I show a few clips of some parts of his play and encourage students to, if they get a chance, to go see a Shakespeare play. This is also about the time that we had the colonization of the North America. So John Smith, he was one of the founders of Jamestown, which is named after King James of the King James Bible. He came right after Elizabeth. And we don't talk much about American history because I spend a whole year on American history, but we do talk about it in the context of how it affected England and the rest of Europe. And that rebellion against Europe kind of touched off other rebellions, including the rebellion in France. And so we talk about the French Revolution, the Reign of Terror, and how it was nothing like the American Revolution, but it turned into this very bloody, deal. This is Robespierre right here, was kind of the father of the Reign of Terror. We move on now, vault ahead here to Victorian England and how Victoria became very influential for the whole world, including America. There she is. She ruled for so long. We move into the World Wars. So World War I, we spent a lot of time on because in American history, America didn't spend that much time in World War I, only about a year and a half at the most. And then World War II, of course, America was much more involved that way. But when I study it from the world perspective, we can see all of those little tiny, details that kind of that caused everything to fall into place where these two world wars came about. Students, of course, really enjoy studying about the wars, especially World War II. It's one of those popular subjects in history. Then we end the year at about September 11, 2001, with the terrorism that came in. If I have time, I will try to get a little more into some of the more current events that are taking place. But typically we end here at September 11th. And then this is the end of the year, and the students now will be getting their projects ready for the end of the year. I said that I like to emphasize art, and I'm just showing off here a little bit. Here I am standing in front of the Oath of the Horatii by Jacques-Louis David in the Louvre in Paris. So I will show students, and every time I have the opportunity to bring art in, I will bring that in.
Okay, so I hope all that information was helpful to you, and if you have any other questions, you can always reach me online by email. And so let me know if you have any questions, and I'd be happy to answer them. Thanks so much.